For Sadie, it was the neighborhood's bad reputation that made it a draw. That and the fact that her family had lived there and was now so afraid of it.
In the novel, Livonia Chow Mein author Abigail Savitch-Lew brings a changing landscape of Brownsville, Brooklyn to life through the stories of 4 generations of a Chinese family, their relationships with each other, and their Jewish and Black neighbors.
I often heard my family tell stories about their immigration from China, and they're running a Chinese restaurant in Brownsville.
Kunai was on his way back to America, to Brooklyn, to a place called Livonia Avenue in the Jewish ghetto of Brownsville.
It's a story of hardship, hope, and healing.
Belonging and wanting to belong is like a really big theme in the book.
Livonia Chow Mein, Club Calvi's Reader's Choice. Hello, I'm Mary Calvi. Welcome to our book club meetup. We are going to dive into Livonia Chow Mein. It is hard to believe that it's Abigail Savitch-Lew's debut novel. It is a saga of a Chinese family over 100 years and their relationship with their Jewish and Black neighbors in Brownsville, Brooklyn. We are going to talk to Abigail about it. We're also going to hear from some of our readers. We got together with them virtually, and we had a lot to talk about. The conversation covered many aspects of this book, Danielle.
Mary, it did, because there was so much to talk about. Livonia Chow Mein includes so many fascinating themes. So there's the immigrant story as a man leaves China to start a life in Brooklyn, then seeing how his dream plays out with his descendants. Then there's the story of the people of Brownsville and how the Jewish and Black populations evolve. And then there's the story of Brownsville itself. I mean, readers felt like they were there.
She makes it very easy to kind of transport yourself into the world of the characters, even if you have no relatability yourself.
It was a very good book, and, I really enjoyed it.
If you're from Brownsville, you know that she did a great job. And if you're not, and you could imagine it, and you can see it because of her words.
I actually went to the address, 78 and 80 Livonia Avenue, and I posted the pictures on the Club Calvi page.
I really love that this is one of the first times that I've picked up a novel and been able to see the sort of recent experience of people fighting for their communities.
The book was very enlightening for me, very historical and sad at the same time.
Yeah, there was sadness, but there was so much more, Mary. There was also drama and mystery, because the book starts out with a fire that has a big impact on the story, doesn't it, Mary?
So gripping, Danielle. And our author brings us to a Brooklyn many have never experienced, but she has, as has her family. We met Abigail in a place that helped bring her story to the pages, Brownsville Heritage House at Stone Avenue Library, known for the first children's library in the country. They also hosted a special exhibit highlighting the family history that our author weaved together in our Reader's Choice, Livonia Chow Mein.
This is my father, the baby. There's pictures here of my grandfather serving in the Navy during World War II. My grandfather was in part of the Brownsville Boys Club and played on the handball team.
As you're telling me the stories of your family, it almost gives me chills because I just read your book and all of the characters are your family in there. This is it here, isn't it?
Yes, that's my grandfather in front of the restaurant. It's a sit-down restaurant, right? Whereas like Brownsville right now, there's a lot of takeout restaurants, right? But back then, there were a lot of Chinese sit-down restaurants, and they were really important to people. I didn't know this growing up, but interviewing people from the neighborhood, they would say like, oh, I used to go there when I had a date.
There's so many people who want to write their family's story, and they want to publish a book about the generations that have come through. But you were able to take that, to take your family history and craft it into this really well-researched novel. It's a step that most people just are never able to leap into, but you did it on your first try. And I was wondering how it felt when you realized you were going to be a published author.
This book took 12 years trying to incorporate lightly fictionalized family stories, and then things that I had read about in a book and things I'd learned about as a reporter, like trying to smash all those together didn't always work, and figuring out what was going to be a center point to really tie everything together, that took time.
It was really a wonderful read, Abigail. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much.
We were so excited when it was named the Reader's Choice because we could dive into Brooklyn. You know, New York City is always a setting in books, and Brooklyn as well, but never quite like this.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story, which is when I got the email that said that it had won, for Club Calvi Book Club, I was sitting with a friend at the Coney Island Aquarium with the seal show. So it was just like this super Brooklyn moment.
Isn't that amazing? So gorgeous. I mean, Brooklyn is always such a great character in books. For you, it's like the real thing because you've walked the streets, you've lived it. It was really fascinating to hear you talk about your family members and how involved they were in that area and how the area impacted them as well.
Yes, I would say, I did not grow up in Brownsville, but I grew up in another part of Brooklyn, in Park Slope. And I grew up hearing a lot of stories about my family's life in both Brownsville and East Flatbush, where they later lived. But I also felt like to really write this book, I had to conduct, that deep research, including like reading a lot about Brownsville's amazing history, as well as talking to residents who had lived there throughout the ages and really could tell me about the amazing history of community organizing in that neighborhood, fighting for social justice and for equity.
We hear about authors going into the rabbit hole. I know I did, and I spent way too much time there, but I enjoyed it thoroughly. I'm wondering, did you feel like you spent quite maybe too much time like researching? Because I spent more time than I think I should have, but I really truly enjoyed, let me just tell you, the absolute details that you brought to this novel.
There was so much research that got thrown out, and I would say most of it was like not about Brownsville. I used a lot of that, yeah. But just like all these other things, like there was this part at one time when like the character Sadie, right? Yeah. It used to be that I had scenes of her at Yale. So, she goes to Yale. So I went to Yale and right? I spent all this time because I didn't go to Yale myself. And then, that whole day was a total waste because I didn't actually use any of that research.
You went to another Ivy League college, but I wonder, when was it that you found that spark to write this book? Was it while you were at the university, or was it even before or after?
I realized recently that I've been writing about some of the themes that are in Livonia Chow Mein for a really long time. In high school, I was writing about people in Brownsville because I had friends in the neighborhood who lived like really close to where my family had. Then in college, I was writing about friendships between people of different backgrounds in Brooklyn. So friendships between young Chinese American girls and young Afro-Latina girls, and sort of exploring how the way we are raced or, discriminated against or misperceived can actually shape the dynamics of a friendship. And I was also writing about politics in college. It's just that all those pieces, I think I was still working them out in, short stories, and it wasn't until after college that I really began to sink into this story. And even then, it changed so much throughout time, yeah.
Meaning your drafts, how many were there?
Maybe 1 million, maybe 2 million. I mean, in the beginning, the story I think was closer to my family's actual story, with more from the actual lives of my uncles and aunts. But as the story moved forward over the years, I just really began to know the characters for themselves and had to really think about the plot, right? Like what would drive people to really sink into this in a century of history.
These are the questions so many of our readers have. So we're going to get back over to Danielle, and she has a few of those questions for you, Abigail.
That is so true, because that is exactly this kind of thing that we talked about during the Readers Meetup. And I love hearing how Abigail worked through all of that to get to the root of the story, because it is about the characters. And the book explores the reactions from different cultures, as Abigail was just saying, and their different perspectives. Some readers said that way opened up their own eyes to ideas that they hadn't explored, or frankly, they had never even thought about. So Gail wanted to know if Abigail had a similar experience.
I would like to ask her, has writing the book changed any of her perspectives about cultures? has it improved her understanding or improved her acceptance, her toleration, love even? How has it touched her?
It really is such a good question.
Yes. I mean, I would say that I am so in love with the community of Brownsville and with the Black and African American communities that have such a rich history there. And, I would say that maybe when I was younger, I had some level of ignorance about the neighborhood. And there's a lot of things that we hear about the neighborhood, even still, about, high crime rates, that kind of thing, without really a full understanding of the context. And so I think learning about the history, meeting so many incredible people, I came to understand, well, first, like how in the 60s, when it was already becoming a majority Black neighborhood, there was incredible organizing around equity in the schools and creating arts programs and all these different things for youth. So all that really hard work that happened. So I came to appreciate that. I also came to understand better just how difficult the 70s and 80s were, given the government neglect, the defunding, the truly like the impacts of the crack epidemic on people's lives, and how hard it was to survive, and how much resilience that took, and also today, questions that people have really stuck it out, rebuilt their neighborhoods, and now are facing new questions, right, about how do we ensure that even as this neighborhood changes, that we are still able to stay in Brooklyn and make this our home, as real estate, is becoming more and more expensive, and other questions about like how do we stay resilient in the face of so much structural violence. So I really appreciate how much I've learned about that community, and I'm so grateful that people have taken me in and given me so many stories and so much trust. Yeah.
Because you talked to folks who were living there, and really it was amazing to see how much you were able to bring into your book of just real life in Brownsville, but also your characters are real characters as well. And they feel like we want them to be part of our family. You bring us so close to them, not just in regard to their personalities, but also when we hear their dialogue and just kind of really feel for them and say, oh, they're going through another tough day. And you begin the book with such a gripping tale of a fire. Tell me about that and why you decided to begin the book so intensely.
I'm going to have to credit a friend who at some point in the process, I decided that this fire would happen. And a friend suggested, maybe you can open the book, right? Maybe that will create the kind of energy that really lures the reader in. And then really understanding, but the sort of more difficult question for me was really figuring out who exactly set the fire? I had the fire before I knew who set it. But I will say that the impetus, I think, for thinking about a fire to begin with was, well, first, it is fiction. So in real life, my family did not actually have a building in their possession that burnt down. But I did know that at some point my grandfather had tenants, and that he was always expressing kind of negative things about the tenants. And I was always wondering, well, my grandfather was Chinese, and I was wondering, what were the tenants' perspective on this? So that first sort of started to shape my desire to write about tenants and landlords. And then when I was learning about all the arson that impacted the whole city, and especially the South Bronx, but also some parts of Brooklyn, understanding how professional criminals would, for the insurance kickback scheme, burn down buildings and really really harm tenants and displace them. So that, I thought, was also an important issue to explore, and worked really well with the plot that I was trying to.
Certainly. I mean, it kept us till the end, wondering who did it. So well done on that. We have so much more to talk to you about. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
The director of Power in the Pen Writing Workshop, Diane is my co-executive director, and I started it so that I can help other authors to write their books and their stories, and it's just been such a blessing because people like Abby came out of nowhere. She interviewed me and quite a few other people, and she worked so hard on getting the authenticity down.
I know the blocks, I know of the projects, I know of everything, surrounding her stories.
I was along with the journey of while she was writing the book, and the book is excellent, and because she did so much research.
Abigail, you mentioned to me when we got a chance to speak about the importance of a community of authors to inspire you and to support you. And it was such a joy to be able to meet the organizers and those who were involved in these writer workshops. You have to tell me a little bit about this, because I think for aspiring writers, they may not realize how important it is to really be in the mix with other writers in order to have those moments when you might have a little bit of writer's block or what have you. But what was it like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I had different communities of writers, but none of them were really new Brownsville. And then I guess on Google or something, I found Kathy Wright Lewis's books, her own novels. She was a born and raised Brownsvillian, and she'd written Mara Seed, Passion's Pride, these books that really beautifully had characters that experienced the history of Brownsville and were, wrestling with spiritual questions. I gobbled down those books and then wrote to her and, asked if we could speak. And she was like, well, why don't you come to my writing workshop? Right? We've got a whole community of writers here. And wow, it was like being welcomed into a family right away. And so it was such a great pleasure both to hear what writing my peers in the workshop were working on, poetry, memoirs, really things coming from the heart. And also to have them weigh in and say, this aspect of Brownsville, you should write more about this, or this is how it really was,
I love it to hear that's how it really was.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, because you might write it in a certain way that you think really works, but from a person's perspective who's from that actual street, they might change that. Wasn't that neat to also hear from one of the readers who said they actually went to the street and also the address? So you had mentioned to me that your grandfather owned a Chinese restaurant, and I loved seeing the photos of that and the experience of that. And I'm sure you heard stories passed down over the generations about the experience that he had there. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about that.
Of those real life stories. Well, I would say that I do believe that for several decades, my family ran in this restaurant, and it was not on Livonia. That was a fictional choice.
Yes.
It was a few blocks away on East 98th Street, below the Sutter Avenue station, Rutland Road. And it was, I think, a place that my family still has fond memories of. But I decided to set it on Livonia because, one, it's such an iconic avenue in terms of, with the train running above.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and also really kind of a great symbol, I think, for the changes that Brownsville has gone through, because for so many, even when I first became more acquainted with the neighborhood, there was just a lot of vacant land from all the abandonment that had happened over the years. And right now, it's being very rapidly redeveloped. And there's a lot of affordable housing, but there's also a lot of questions about affordable for who. So a lot of you could say mixed feelings in the neighborhood about all the changes.
Yeah. Our readers have a number of other questions for you, so get ready. Let's get you back over to Danielle.
Yes, I have a question from Susan. So Susan's been a member of the club since the beginning, and she was so looking forward to joining our readers meetup, but then unfortunately she was unable to. So she asked me to ask the question for her. So Susan says she wondered about Abigail's use of ghosts in the story. They seem to appear quite often. So one example Susan gave was later in the story when the character named Jason was living alone and he was going through a difficult time, and he would often see his grandfather sitting outside his window. So Abigail, Susan wants to know, what was the significance of the use of ghosts?
Since I was a small child, We've always gone to the cemeteries for the Qingming holiday, which is you go to your ancestors' graves and you have a picnic and you present them with food and wine, and you bow and you burn fake money for them so that it will go to wherever they are. And so ghosts, I think, are just almost like a casual part of Chinese culture. And I wanted to use them in this novel in a kind of magical realist way where they were just seamlessly incorporated, but also they are serving as a metaphor. And I think if readers look closely, they'll see that the older characters, right? The characters like Kun Lai, who born and raised in China, have a very different relationship to ghosts than the younger characters. And in fact, as the generations move forward, the characters have less and less of a connection to ghosts. There might still be ghosts there, but they're either rejecting them or not able to see them. And I think that to me was a metaphor too for our changing relationship with the traditional culture, with our polytheistic origins, with China, as people become more and more American. And I think that in a way there's a kind of wistfulness there too, because Sadie, who's, this, her great grandfather came, so she's, third generation, depending on how you want to put it. She wants to understand the past, but she can't even see any ghosts at all. So in a way, there's also something lost.
So embracing tradition and being so far away from it that you even can't even do it, even if you wanted to. You do take us back quite a few generations in your book, and really have to embrace another culture in another part of the globe as you're writing. Tell me about your experience in writing about that and in such a past. And I wonder what that felt like and what your research was in order to get that on the page.
To write those Chinese. Yeah. Well, I will say that I went to China twice as a sort of study abroad student. And I had the opportunity to go to Toisan, where my family is from, and that was truly an incredible experience. I always tell the story that it's still a very modest place, but people were so welcoming and they had the freshest food, So I remember my we call him uncle, but more like a third cousin, bringing me to a restaurant, and the restaurant brought out a live fish, and it was like flapping on the pavement, and they're like, see, very fresh, and now we're going to butcher it. So I just have these very strong memories of what was valuable to the remaining people there. But also it's strange because Toisan is a place, especially the villages where my family came from, that it does feel a little like a ghost town because so many people have left. It's a real site for the diaspora. So many people have come to the US or gone to Australia or Hong Kong even. And so in a way, there is a lot of feeling of history and ghosts there as well. So yeah, I think that was inspiring. Oh, one other thing is that I was speaking to a friend of my uncle's who had moved to Hong Kong from the US. And he was telling me about how his father, my grandfather, that whole generation of Chinese men who immigrated to the United States in the 1930s and 40s, how challenging that experience was for them, and how it was challenging because maybe they saw themselves as people who maybe could become American, but then faced a lot of discrimination and were wrestling a lot with that their whole life. So I think those conversations I had in Hong Kong, in Toisan, did end up influencing the novel.
It really was beautifully written. And we really understand their struggles and are really rooting for them throughout their journey. So thank you for that part. We want to check back in with Danielle. We have a couple of other questions from our readers.
A couple of other questions. There were so many during our readers meetup because Abigail brought so much to the story. She just talked about her own family history, owning the Chinese restaurant, and also took inspiration from the people of Brownsville. Well, Abigail, as she mentioned, was also a reporter. So she brought her intense researching skills and tenacity that she learned from doing that. So this question is from Marie, who was a community board member and activist in East Harlem, where Abby was a reporter.
The question I would have for Abby is what she thinks about the role of local journalism and journalists after, writing this novel? Like, does she have a different reflection on like her experience as a journalist and like what she thinks about like how journalism can help communities in their struggle, or what needs to happen there?
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I'm so glad to see Marie, who is an incredible advocate for fair housing and justice in New York, and taught me so much when I was interviewing her, when I was reporting on housing and development issues in East Harlem. But I think she asked a really good question. And I think that both my experience as a journalist and then also writing this book did give me a lot of time to reflect on what are the responsibilities of a journalist. I think that in school, when we take journalism classes, right, where I was often taught, the importance of objectivity, neutrality, getting both sides, and also the importance of figuring out, good, reliable sources. And all of that is, important to have balance, important to speak to experts, absolutely. But I think that my own experience led me to some new lessons. One is I just don't think that it's possible to be fully objective, because I think every journalist comes with some kind of bias or ignorance that maybe they don't know. And I think that it's really important to understand why one is coming to do this to begin with, And I think for me, it's really important that the role of the journalist be to uplift the voices of people who are not getting heard, and make sure that structural inequalities are really examined and interrogated. And I think that some of the ways that a journalist needs to be able to do that is, one, like really make sure that they listen to multiple voices in the community, not just the loudest ones, right? And to also, if people with a big platform, whether they're politicians or corporations, developers, they may really believe what they're saying, but it's still important to interrogate all the details and really make sure that they are fully representing the truth. And I think too that, as we see in the novel, there's an interesting relationship between sources and, meaning reporter and the people they interview, right? Where it can become easy to kind of see them as these I don't want to say pawns exactly, but it's just like, oh, I need to draw the information out of them.
I was just going to say, they kind of see them as a quote,
Yes.
just a quote for the story. Yeah. So I think you really nailed it when it came to your reporter in your story, because she really is doing what you're saying she should be doing. She's really trying to get the voices to really understand what's happening in the community, not just from the experts. So I think that's so beautifully done. We have one last question from our readers, but go ahead. Before
I just want to say, I think she grows, right? Like, I think in the beginning, she is making some mistakes, and it's over time that she learns really how to have an authentic relationship.
Yeah. That evolving of that character is really beautiful to watch. Let's get over to Danielle one more time.
So one last question, and this question comes from our last Reader's Choice author. So we asked previous authors to record a question for the next author. So here's T. Kira Madden, author of the bestseller Whidbey.
Hi, Abigail. I'm so curious, was there a character, through line, or plot point that you had planned for this book that didn't work out, that resisted you or resisted the book? And if so, what did that block or resistance teach you about the way the story wanted to go?
Oh, T. Kira Madden. She's amazing. I appreciate the question. Yes, there were a lot of things that got scrapped over the years. One of them was, we were just talking about Sadie, the reporter character. Sadie I only decided to add Sadie in like 2020, so that was about halfway through writing.
Right, you're 12 years, so 6 years in. Sadie comes in after 6 years. How about that?
Yes, there was a predecessor to Sadie, and that was Cleo. And she was this college student who went to Yale, and it was really focused on her experience at Yale and her friendships there. At that point, the book felt kind of all over the place, right? Like what Sadie allows us to do is come back to Brownsville in the present tense, right? We're seeing it through history, but so Cleo being at this whole other location in Connecticut was kind of, it just felt too diffuse.
Well, I feel like the way it came together with your cast of characters couldn't have been better. So I just want to congratulate you on the Livonia Chow Mein, and we can't wait to hear what comes next from Abigail Savitch-Lew. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you about the book. We really loved reading it, and we'll be back. Danielle, we had so much fun.
We did.
Reading
That was a great
Livonia Chow Mein. Yeah, so much to talk about it. And we have some great news now. We just announced that A Pair of Aces by Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray was voted the new Reader's Choice.
It's very exciting. So readers can't wait to start this book. Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray are best-selling authors, duo. They recorded a video message to the club, and they said A Pair of Aces is a tale of two women on opposite sides of the law back in the 1930s in New York City. One is black, one is white, and they come together to bring down the mob and the infamous crime boss, Lucky Luciano.
Yeah, the book is based on the work of New York's first black female prosecutor who was instrumental in convicting Luciano. You can click on clubcalvi.com to read free excerpts from the book. And we'd love for you to join us on our Facebook group and be part of our book discussions. Just scan the QR code on your screen to get sent directly to our page. We also have information on clubcalvi.com. And what a great way to kick off summer. We'll see you soon for our next meetup.